anything to do with money, with funds, is so much process, procedure, but also innovation driven. But one doesn't go without the other. What do you have to tweak with your business to make sure that they can come, and how do you make sure that you then capture that audience? Again, it comes back to who is your audience, and if your restaurant is still full and you don't suffer in terms of your covers, then why not? And maybe before it was underpriced.
Welcome back to the Chef JKP podcast. And on the show today, we have the founder and managing director of Black Coral Consulting, Judith Cartwright. Judith, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, James, for having me. Glad to be here.
So, first things first, before we get into all of the technical things, can you tell me your first or favorite ever childhood food memory?
Being German, that's Spätzle. So it's a homemade pasta, and together with schnitzel, a very traditional dish, homemade, by my grandmother, by my mother. And I do that quite often now for my children as well. And even to an extent where our nanny now knows how to make the Spätzle.
Amazing. And so what were the so that was your predominant food memory. What were the things were you sort of eating in Germany as you were growing up?
Well, Germany is all about, bread, potatoes, a lot of the heavy dishes, and then also cakes in the afternoon.
Oh.
And that's just, that's one of my passions, is actually baking. And I bake a lot with the children, all sorts of cakes, cupcakes, breads, etc., etc. Certain cooking the Schupfnudeln is another one. It's almost like the Italian version of gnocchi. And with your potatoes, with your eggs, with your flours, and they put it into the hot water. And then you can make that in all sorts of different styles. The Maultaschen, they come in all sorts of variations. And that really came from an origin from the monks, because they weren't allowed to eat meat on Fridays. And there's a city called Maulbronn, not too far away from my hometown. And they hid the meat in a pasta. So it's almost like a giant ravioli.
Oh, wow.
And that's why they're called Maultaschen. And that's just then, it's one of the traditions down south in Baden-Württemberg, my home state, close to Stuttgart. And that's one of the dishes that you just don't get here in Dubai.
Oh, wow.
And then we make that at home. It's quite a bit of effort, but it's very, very tasty.
So there is a niche for that dish to be here.
Exactly.
So for people to take the opportunity at least. So then when you were growing up through your adolescence, were you involved in hospitality in any way, or did you always choose another path?
No, I was not involved in hospitality, growing up. But it's just after school, I wasn't quite sure what to do. I knew I wanted to do something more hands-on, innovative. And then the hospitality aspect just then crossed my path. And then that's when I went to a hotel management school. And then I did the business administration path. But I also worked in the kitchen back then. So you had in Germany, you go through every single department, and you also go to the school. So it's almost like mini internships with every subject that you would have to cover. And then you do that. And then when you finish, then you do a longer internship. And then you choose the path that you want to get into.
So before we get into that path that you chose, how long were you in the kitchen for?
That was about 4 months.
And which departments within the kitchen were you doing?
It's all of them. So at the time, as interns, it was at the Hilton in Munich, at the Park Hilton. And we were in charge of the banquet kitchen.
Oh my God.
So then we were organizing huge events, and I mean, and I have vivid memories from that period of time and some funny and also embarrassing stories, But we, they gave us the responsibility, and then we were in charge of putting everything together, having the banquet order, and that whole organizing was just lots of fun. And then also understanding everything that lies behind it, even like how many pieces of butter you have to put onto the plate, how many liters of orange juice you have to order. And then, when you wanted to have your whipping cream, you had to go into the section for the pâtissier. And he was a very strict one, and then he said, if you don't ask, you don't get. So then you always had to stand at the line. And then you just ask, how much you wanted for what you wanted for, etc., etc. And you better didn't spill anything.
And European chefs are very hard.
Yeah.
Right. So, but that must have been amazing for you to sort of see all of those departments to then go into what you're doing now. So then if we sort of fast forward into your sort of degree, why did you choose the revenue management or the management business side of things?
There was also something more I always wanted to be in sales and marketing. That's always something that really intrigued me. But then I had the opportunity when I did my internship in the US in South Carolina on Hilton Head Island to learn about revenue management. And back then, it was still quite new, and it was more inventory management, system controls, and focusing mainly on rooms. And I really enjoyed that. And then when I came back, as a good German, then I felt I have to go back after 3 years to Germany, get some work experience onto my CV. And revenue management was even newer back then. And then I had the opportunity to join Le Méridien, and then the rest is really history. So then I went from one hotel to another, had opening hotels. And then when you do opening hotels, you always had a lot to do with every single aspect of logistics. So whether it was on the receiving side, where everybody had to help out. In Germany at the time, we didn't have an army of people where everybody was doing their own thing. So whatever needed doing, we all had to chip in. And we all had to help. At one point, then I was stocking the minibars. But that then also gave me really great insight in terms of understanding, what the mini-bar checker has to do. And then again, from a procurement side of things, then when you're receiving the goods, how you're handling the goods, expiration dates. And then from there, I went to Kuala Lumpur. I was transferred with Le Méridien, and then Starwood took over. So then we did the Starwood transition. And again, anything related to revenue optimization and commercial strategies. And then from there, I had the opportunity to join Manor International in Bangkok. At the time, there were 14 hotels. So Dilip Rayakaria, who is the CEO currently, he was the VP Finance, and we joined at the same day. And then there you had almost a blank sheet of paper. And I had an amazing mentor, Heidi Gempel at the time. And then we built the revenue management function, and anything to do with money, with funds, is so much process, procedure, but also innovation driven. But one doesn't go without the other. Otherwise then it's almost like you imagine building a pipeline, and then if the pipeline has a crack, the water leaks through. Or if the pipeline is clogged, you don't have the business flow. And that's anything that you do in the business, whether it's revenue management, revenue optimization, commercial strategies. You might be spending money on one thing, but then again, if the process isn't there, you might be spending the money and it doesn't reach the end consumer. And then you don't get your return on investment.
So if I just sort of backtrack to all of that, essentially, for those people who have never been involved in revenue management, if we were to break it down into sort of smaller segments, doesn't matter whether it's, let's say, excuse me, whether it's restaurants or hotels, is there one sort of specific sort of bloodline or recipe that you follow for any business?
So the statement is finding the right price for the right customer at the right time through the right channel. And behind that sits what we refer to a revenue optimization process. And that process starts with the data collection. So what data is being collected? How are the systems set up?
And Judith, sorry to interrupt. Is that before the business is open or during?
Before.
Okay.
Yeah.
So pre-opening phase.
So it's even before the whole concept is conceived.
Okay.
Is that you need to understand, who is the audience that you want to capture? What audience do you want to cater for? And then how do you have to set up your business? And that goes across, how many chairs you have, and even then, how your kitchen is positioned, where your kitchen is located, how is the flow and the process between the kitchen staff and the waiting staff to then serve your meal. Then your point of sale system, your recipe management systems that need to be set up, your procurement system and how you're receiving the information. You need to evaluate what data will you have and what systems do you need, and then what data needs to be the input, and what is it the output that you want, which then goes into the next step of the process, which is then the analysis. And then from the analysis, then you evaluate, and you have your learnings, you have your rights and your wrongs or your not sures. And then from there, you would go into the strategy setting. And then from the strategy setting, you go into the activation. And then after you go into the measurement, that's when you critique. And then you identify what has worked and what is it that you want to stop, start, and continue.
Wow. So that's amazing, because a lot of businesses, I would say, don't even go into those details. They just think, okay, I'm going to open a place, and then they do it, and then they don't have the fail safe to do so. So then after Singapore and you built this system, when did you, or how did the opportunity arrive for you to come over to Atlantis?
When I was in Bangkok, then I was headhunted to join the Atlantis as their head of, revenue management. And I came from managing 14 hotels, owned and managed across different brands. And then when looking at the Atlantis, it was quite an interesting journey, actually, because revenue management didn't exist yet.
And it was
property.
When it was pre-opening.
I joined just after the opening, so in November 2009. So the hotel had just opened.
Right.
And I still remember now, now we're going back to the average room rate, but everybody was doing their head in because the average room rate was low. But it's just because the segments weren't segmented correctly, and the data was collected and the data output was correct, but the way the data was looked at and interpreted wasn't the correct way.
So your job, was it to work with the general manager? Was it to also work with the entire finance team and all the heads of department?
Correct. All the heads of departments. So first we sorted rooms, revenue management. And then shortly after, then I was tasked with F&B revenue management for the restaurants, because there was a numerous amount of restaurants, from celebrity chef to Michelin star, high energy, fine dining, but then also all day dining outlets. And then again, it goes back to the process. So then what do you have to do for every single business unit process-wise in terms of getting that flow going? But at the time, what my biggest learning curve is that whilst I knew what had to be done, the audience didn't know what needed to be done. And that was really then, taking people onto the journey, breaking down the barriers, from operational F&B, everything was very fast-paced, fast-moving. The chefs in the kitchen, what do we do with you? Just let us cook the food.
Yeah.
So why do you talk about menu engineering?
So that's what I sort of wanted to understand with you. In the beginning, especially Atlantis, you had a lot of, how should I call it? Strong personalities in I'm sure, the kitchens. And of course, they had no idea about food cost, and they had no idea about overheads. They just wanted to be creative. So how did you tackle that? Because it's quite sensitive, especially to chefs who are like, "Oh, who your finance? What are you doing here?"
Yeah. No, it was very sensitive, And then also, in the end, data talks,
right?
Gut feeling walks, right? That's always what I say. So and a lot of things are just were based on gut feeling. And then I said to the SVP F&B at the time, I said, give me one restaurant. And I said, and let's just try that as a case study. And that restaurant, it was Seafire. It's a family hotel. I had been in Bangkok before, and then at the Atlantis, maybe 10 or 11 months, roughly. So then we looked at the data, and between 6 and 8 o'clock, the restaurant was just simply empty. And then from 8:30, 9 o'clock, it was busy. So then I looked at the data and I just asked the question, why is that? Oh, because it's a late dining culture in Dubai, Judith. And then I thought, okay, fine. So then what do you do when business doesn't come? Then marketing then suggests an early bird. Oh, let's just launch an early bird. Okay, fine. So we launched an early bird. Still not much improvement. And the money that was spent on the marketing did not get the return. You see, Judith, we told you it's a late dining culture. You just don't understand. And I was thinking, if you give me something, I'm like a dog with a bone. I'll get down through to the bottom. And then I said, no, okay, let's just take the process and let's just go through by through. So the data that is being collected, how is it being collected? What are the systems in place and how are they being set up? And then it didn't take too long. Then we came to the restaurant reservation system. And then somebody during the pre-opening, and that just comes back to the earlier conversation that we had, how important it is to set things up from the get-go correctly with segmentation, your price points, and everything how you want to measure later. It just turned out that the restaurant reservation system, the tables, were capped at 20 people between 6 and 8 p.m. out of 120 or out of 150 seats. And I asked, why is that?
Crazy.
And then I was told, it's just simply because the kitchen didn't want to get overwhelmed in the early hours. But then from 9 o'clock, everything was wide open. And that's why the kitchen was getting hammered every single evening from 9 o'clock in the evening, which led people to assume it's a late dining culture.
Right.
But if it's a family resort, then no. So then I sat down with the head chef, who, by the way, was the one that taught me how to fry the schnitzel in Munich during my internship.
Oh, my God.
Sasha Trima at the time,
yes,
who now
yes.
heads up the water park. So then we sat down and then together with the head of F&B. And I said, how do you feel about making some more tables available? And then so we did this gradually. And then that fixed, part of the problem. And then within months generated $1 million more in revenues.
Oh my God.
And that then helped me to get that breakthrough. So
Right.
then they said, okay, well, why don't you take the next restaurant? And that was even before we started talking about menu engineering or menu design. The menu engineering piece, I'm sure, the audience has heard of whether you have your stars, your cows, your question marks, and your dogs, which items are high in profit but fast selling, which items are high in profit and slow selling, which items are high in cost but fast selling, and which items are low in cost and slow selling. And then how do you position these around the menu to make sure that the customer then actually buys them? And then we did workshops because you had a lot of silos, and that's what you also will see, that we see a lot in restaurants or in businesses, that then marketing talks about one item, social media about another one. And I'm not exaggerating now when I say that then social media is pushing the steak, but in reality, it's the sea bass that has the highest profitability. So, but you want the customer then also to purchase and to convert based on your most profitable item. That is also the storytelling as part of the concept.
Wow. So in the end, Judith, how long were you involved with the Kerzner Group?
12 and a half years.
My goodness. So that was spanned across the one and onlys.
Correct.
Atlantis. So you must have seen and been involved in so many aspects of the operations indirectly, or understanding the chef, understanding the products. So that's quite phenomenal, because the other thing I would sort of wanted to ask you is, in my time when I was a corporate chef, the thing I dreaded the most was something called the BRMs, or the business revenue meetings. And there was always the head chef or the executive chef of the unit would come, and it would be like an interview, because you'd have the revenue manager, general manager, and they're all asking you, what's the food cost? What have you done this? And and some of the chefs, they just get completely defensive, and they don't want to be there, So how for those kinds of chefs, what advice would you give them when it comes to sort of dealing with the numbers or dealing with the finance team?
It's the understanding your business. And I think the advice that I would give to the entire business is not just to the chefs, because the chefs, they need to be creative, they need to cook, they need to get the advice from the finance team to, if the finance team or the revenue management team was to say, chef, if you tweaked XYZ, does this work with your menu? And then your food cost might improve, or, depending what the objective is. When you look at restaurants in hotels, a lot of time is spent around what the breakfast allocation is to the F&B department. But nobody speaks about, so how do we have maybe seasonal pricing in restaurants? Because when you look now look at Dubai, whether it's an independent restaurant or it's a restaurant within a hotel, and I'm not talking about dynamic pricing just yet, but we expect the low season customer to spend the same amount for a pasta dish like during the high and the peak season. So why then not, amend your menu so that you're able to have more bundling, more packaging, so that you actually then speak to the audience. And that's then also how you avoid in the summer months all the deliveries coming into the hotels, right? And then that's then also how the hotels can convert a lot more of their restaurants and their dining. And that's one of the common problems here in Dubai. But the advice then too for the chefs I would give, there are training classes available, on the numbers. There are, I'm part of I'm the chair for the Revenue Optimization Advisory Board with HSMAI. Trainings can be done there. There are great conferences, and then sometimes also just reach out to your revenue manager, revenue director at the hotel and just say, look, can we sit down? These are my challenges. How can we fix them collectively?
Because when it comes to the challenges, Judith, the other, I'm sure you're very much aware, the most common I get, and I speak to a lot of different people, is the constant fight between purchasing manager and exec chef. Yeah. The chef knows his products really well, inside out, quality, so on and so forth, but the purchasing manager has to bring in the bottom line almost. So there's always that fight. How can we, have common ground there? Because it's not easy.
That's not easy. And then it's also for, from a purchasing perspective, a lot of times what's a challenge then also for the chef is then when the recipes are built in systems and ingredients are added and then the supplier changes. So then you have to change that again, right, in the system. So again, it goes back to how the systems are managed and how the systems are set up and that the right product is purchased that has the quality that the chef wants. A lot of times it just simply gets confusing for purchasing because there are just so many ingredients in the recipe management system. If then the ingredients that aren't relevant anymore, if the menu changes, can they be moved to inactive? And that way then it also gives the procurement department a much clearer oversight to help them achieve their KPIs and then for the chefs to achieve their KPIs. And it's just sitting down to understand, okay, what are the KPIs? What is it that we want to achieve collectively? And how can we get there? So how can we improve the food cost without me jeopardizing the quality of the products that I'm using? How can then the whole menu become more profitable? And that doesn't mean that you have to change things. Sometimes that you have to remove things. Sometimes you just change a few things around. And that comes back to the menu design. When you go and dine in restaurants, have a look at the menus and what stands out. 9 out of 10 times it's the price point versus the actual dish. And if you're able to do the dish so that it's storytelling, that is enticing, that as the customer understand these ingredients have been locally sourced, and that's why the ingredients or that's why that dish is so unique, then you get this across social media, and then you push that out, you do the storytelling, and then you see, and that's the whole 360-degree approach. It doesn't just start with the chef or with procurement, and it doesn't end with the chef and with procurement. It's really that 360-degree cycle of what you do from an activation perspective, commercial strategies, finance, revenue management, chef, and procurement, and understand what is it that we want to achieve, set the KPIs, set the dashboards and the data that people can read, and not just a whole bunch of numbers, to make sure that the data is storytelling, so that the chef can easily see on the matrix and on the dashboard, this is what I need to tweak. And you know what? This worked extremely well. That's what I'm going to push going forward.
Because also being with or spending so much time within Kerzner, they're also notoriously well known for having the very best of the best restaurants and gastronomy in the world. So does that model still work for the high-end fine dining restaurants?
It does. And again, it comes back to what is it that you want to achieve with the fine dining high-end restaurants from a bigger picture perspective. You might make more revenues per square meter from a fast-moving fast food restaurant, right? Versus a fine dining restaurant per square meter. But that's not the objective. Then the fine dining restaurant goes back to the storytelling, to the experience that the guest is going to have at the hotel. It's again something that the hotel can use from a social media perspective, or if you use the independent restaurants, the brands, some of the famous brands around the world, then it's a very fine balance, because they always, if they want to grow, they then also need to make sure that one, they are profitable, but at the same time, that formula needs to be adapted and adjusted gradually, but it still works.
So then after your 12 and a half years, you now have this company, Black Coral Consulting. Why did you decide to break away after such a long stint?
It was an amazing experience, and, the experience that I've been able to gain with, across casino, across concerts, across spa, across water parks, across rooms and various F&B outlets. And it's always been a dream of mine to do my own consultancy. The time was right. I always said that, when my son goes into grade 1, I'll do that. The pandemic came to an end, and it was the right time to launch. And it's been an amazing journey. And now we're helping owners, asset managers, and management companies to unleash their profit potential.
So then I want to ask you, how tricky is it to sort of be dealing now with asset managers and owners, and everybody has different visions for the business? How do you go about dealing with those things?
So it goes back to alignment, understanding what is everybody's objective, and then really to create that total revenue optimization culture. And that's really important. You need to have the people on the journey with you to get the buy-in. We do a lot with workshops. We listen to, what everybody around the table, what is their objective? And most times, people have a different objective. What's important to you as the chef versus what's important to the head of procurement. And then we bring the synergies together. And then we identify, where are the gaps and where are the rooms for improvement? Or simply, how do we help to elevate the business to the next level? But most importantly, how do we build the bridges between the teams? And then whether it's within the team of an existing hotel, how do we build the bridges between the owner and the management company and the asset manager? So how do we make sure that the management company delivers what they've promised the owner, and not just do the commercial planning and the strategy during the budget time and then get the sign off from the owner? But then we would also make sure that then the owner knows where and how to follow up, that the management company actually implements that.
Because, Judith, I just want to sort of pinpoint something. I think that is a very tricky thing to do, because how do you get the buy-in of the owner? How do you get the buy-in of the management company have a vision for the certain asset per se? Then the owner has a separate vision. Then they bring you in, your predominant job is, of course, to listen both sides and then mediate, because that must be not arduous, but quite tricky to make everybody understand. Then there has to be one vision.
There is one vision, and then also where do you meet? So I'm about to launch a book on asset management with a commercial lens.
Oh, amazing!
Because a lot of times the owner's asset manager comes from a finance background,
right?
And then or from a GM's background, the management company has the commercial strategies, and it's really then making sure that how do you make sure that you optimize the both, and everybody has an amazing wealth of talent and skill sets. But it's making sure that the one understands the other, that the money is spent in the right area, but then also that the owner makes funds available to spend in the right areas, and then also sees the return. And 99.9% of everything that we do, we can tie back to an ROI. That's then also when we engage with somebody, we set the goals of what we want to achieve then collectively. And then you work through that, you find out then again, where's the process, where are the gaps? And, it's when you really turn every single stone, then you find out it's like peeling back the onion, right? So the more you peel back the onion, the more you can look under the hood. And I always say it's like, don't expect what you don't inspect. And that's also the key. Even if somebody tells you this is how it's done, then we go in, we dig deep, and then we identify, is that actually how it's being done? And is that also everybody else's perception? And not just like what we think is being done and what's actually happening.
Right. Well, I think that's an amazing point because, you're absolutely right. You need to really dig deep to ensure or to know what's going on. Yeah. It's just like going back to your first point about Seafire, and a simple reservation error then brought in, or a tweak brought in millions, which I think is amazing. So then I want to understand if a business, kitchen, restaurant, whatever it may be, is in a times or is in a time of financial crisis and you were to be brought in, then how do you start or go about working with those teams to turn that business around?
I mean, first then, you would sit down with the team just simply to understand how the business has been conceived, what was the vision, where are we now in comparison to where we aspire to be or wanted to be, how long the business has been open. And then the first step is then to look at the financials. What do the financials say? But then also how are the financials retrieved? And then we go straight into the systems before we start even talking about any changes, any commercial strategies, any change of concept. We would take a look at the demographic. How does this compare to industry benchmarks? And then you go into more details before you even go into the menu engineering. You look at your meal periods and how busy is every single period. How many people are actually dying? What is then your conversion in terms of your covers? How long are people sitting? How are the systems set up? How does it work between procurement? Who does what, right? And then, and that's then usually where we do identify the first gaps and the first tweaks for improvement before we even start talking about the menu. Then we download the data and then we look at the menu engineering matrix, then again to identify which items have a high cost but are selling well and which items have a low cost but are not selling well. And then you would go through the menu item by menu item, sit down with the chef, then to understand, okay, so why is this dish on the menu? Are we able to find different suppliers to reduce the cost? Are we able to increase maybe the pricing? Do we have to change the name of the dish? Do we have to make it more descriptive? And then you would go into the design. And you almost have to imagine the menu design like the Google heat map, right? So when you take a menu, where does your eye go? And where your eye goes, and that's where you would want to have your highest, the item that you want to push, the one that you believe in, and the one that you're convinced that this is the dish that you want to promote on social media, that's the dish why your guests are going to come to the restaurant. You want to place where it actually converts. And then we look at the staff training from a waiter perspective. Do they know which item the chef wants to convert? Do they know what is the most profitable item? And then that becomes then what the waiters are suggesting to you as the customer in combination with, starters, your beverages, etc., etc. And then you would then evaluate again the data later to see what has actually worked. But then also from an activation perspective, and that's almost the chicken and the egg approach. So then if you have an underperforming business, you still need to spend money in certain areas in order to push it. But then you also need to allocate the funds and then you need to put the stake in the ground by when things should improve for you then to, again, make the tweaks.
The other thing I wanted to sort of also ask you from not just a Dubai perspective, but UAE perspective, do businesses nowadays very seriously consider marketing and PR budgets? Because it's an integral part. It's a must-have nowadays. 20 years ago, 30 years ago, not so much. Yeah. But how do you see that now, budgeting-wise?
Budgeting-wise, not enough businesses are actually doing. So again, when we come back to the commercial plan in hotels, a lot of time is spent on the rooms just simply because that's where the highest profit comes down. And imagine if people spend 50% more of their strategic time on other business units. So for restaurants, for spas, for retail, how much more that could improve. And we always talk about the magic percentage for the food costs, 28, 29%. But why? Why can it not be better? Or why not have a higher food cost, but have, higher higher revenues. I mean, why is that the magic number? That's something that people don't challenge. And how do you actually tweak that? And maybe you have to have a different food cost for a certain period of time in order to turn the restaurant around, but then later you scale it down again. And
especially during the summer, as you said. And you mentioned something earlier, which I also want to understand. Tell me about dynamic pricing.
So dynamic pricing, it comes back to finding the right price for the right customer at the right time through the right channel. And dynamic pricing is all around you. You have different pricing when you just take an Uber or a Careem right now. If you're leaving during business peak periods, you pay more for your journey than when you travel in the less. When you do your deliveries, a lot of the apps now, they charge a higher premium during the peak demand periods. Rooms, they fluctuate the pricing based on price and demand. And restaurants don't do that quite yet. In the US, it's coming. And there is a system being developed called Juicer, which I'm very curious to see how it's actually going to work. But then also when you look at seasonal pricing, so maybe for restaurants, we talk about seasonal pricing before we talk about dynamic pricing. And we have different spending power in Dubai throughout the year or in the UAE, across the UAE. The summer customer comes on a smaller budget than the, let's say, Q4 and Q1 customer. So for them to pay, let's just say ice cream, 20 dirhams for a scoop of ice cream, is 5 times the price that you would pay for a scoop of ice cream in Italy or in Germany, just as an example. So if you're coming on a smaller budget, that is still very expensive for you. So imagine if then hotels adjusted that slightly, but then have a higher conversion, which is then again in favor of the food cost instead of selling less at a higher price point.
And could that also work? Because I do agree with you 100%. Could that also work for the higher end restaurants in the summer in this region?
It could also work. Again, if they were able to attract more volume based on that and have more opening timings, they could still have their minimum spend, for certain sections or for certain areas. That's also a point of dynamic pricing or finding the right, if you then have certain sections or if you were to bundle your meals, so what are your 2 items that have a low food cost that you could bundle together as a dish that are complementing one another?
And would that then, if let's say, for example, I were to be a restaurant and I was located within a hotel and I still have to pay the hotel rent or whatever it may be, how then would I approach either the general manager or the director of revenue to say, listen, throughout the summer period, I want to reduce my prices. So can we discuss how it would work with my rent or how we would discuss with the split? How would you go about tackling that?
So that's something that you would have to calculate through, on a cost-benefit analysis. So if you were to reduce your pricing, how much more revenue could you generate in theory? And would that actually warrant to reduce the lease or the rent of the restaurant? Or do you actually simply then achieve a profitable EBITDA? Because that's also a lot of businesses here in the summer. They have a negative EBITDA.
What does it mean for people who don't know what that is?
Okay, so that's basically your earnings before interest and taxes, etc. So it's or then just simply your profitable cost, in simple terms. So would you then run a profit over these months versus not having a profit and running negative numbers over that period?
So then the other thing I want to sort of get from your perspective is, what are the common denominators that you have seen operators get completely wrong when it comes to the numbers?
It's not understanding the numbers and making decisions without looking at the numbers. That's the number one thing, or not understanding what's happening on the floor. So just to give you another example, I was at a restaurant, I don't know, maybe now 12 months ago, 18 months ago, and I was having lunch, a business lunch, and it's a restaurant on a very high floor with lots of nice views across Dubai. And the business lunch was not available on a Friday. And the first thing then we came and then we sat down, and the first thing then the waiter said, oh, by the way, today there is no business lunch. And then we said, okay, that's fine, and we just simply assumed it was going to be busy. We'll just order a la carte. the restaurant normally is pumping and it's busy from 12 o'clock onwards. And then we sit down and there were 3 more tables occupied. And then I asked the waiter again, I said, so are you expecting a large group or, what's happening? So I assume it's going to be very busy because you don't have the business lunch available. Oh, no, it's because it's Friday. And then I said, looking at this amazing view across Dubai. And then I said to my friend that we were having dinner, I said, I know exactly what the problem is. So then I asked for the manager to come over and I said, what time do people come on a Friday afternoon? Oh, they come at 3 o'clock. And I said, is that because it's after prayer time? And then he said, yes. I said, so why don't you have your business lunch available that goes from noon until 2:30 p.m.? Oh, because it's the weekend. And I said, but look around you. Oh, it's not busy. I said, now, if you want to rise and shine with your management, who probably made the decision sitting somewhere in a corporate office, assuming it's going to be busy because it is Friday and not looking at the data. And then that was adjusted. I was thinking I should have free lunches in that restaurant for the rest of my life. But then I never took it forward, and I was just thinking, that wasn't my good deed, bringing it back to the business. Yeah. But that's just a lot of times. It's the systems, it's understanding the data, but then also questioning the data. Why is it? And again, what is it that you want to stop, start, and continue? And that's even before you go into profitability, food cost, or anything like that evaluations. And that's really critical. It's really understanding who is your customer audience, who is your customer that's coming, and how do you have to adjust your business to cater to that customer. So if it's a summer customer who doesn't come to your restaurant because it's just simply a low season customer, less spending power, what do you have to tweak with your business to make sure that they can come, and how do you make sure that you then capture that audience?
But isn't it incredible how some small tweaks can make such a monumental difference to a business?
A lot of times it's not rocket science, and a lot of times people get scared when they just hear the data or when they have to look at an Excel spreadsheet. Coming back to your earlier comment, then when the chef is getting interviewed, scrutinized about the data, so that then also doesn't allow the chef to think creatively than if every time the focus is only on the food cost. But then what else can I do to improve the overall experience for the guest? How can I create the synergies? How can I make sure that the commercial teams understand what I want to achieve with my restaurant? And how do I, as the end consumer, understand why I should come to your restaurant? What's the uniqueness about it? And that's then when you go into the storytelling.
I think it's a really incredible point, Judith, because if everybody was to take that particular thing where everybody sat down and began to think about synergies when it came to the business, I think everybody would really, certainly back in the day when I was looking at the spreadsheets, and then you've got the director, the financial director saying no, and you're just like, okay, I'm trying to do that, but I have Ramadan to contend with, I have summer to contend with, and then you want me to hit a 20% food cost, but then you've just changed the supply, which is it's
and finance individuals, finance departments, very talented in what they do, and then if the chef can take them onto the journey, and if the chef can get the finance teams to understand what they want to achieve, then the finance team will not just scrutinize and question, but then they will also then be able to help collaborate.
Right.
And they will be able to tell the chefs, have you considered this? Have you considered that? And the chefs, they need to be open to that.
Of course.
A lot of times the walls are also built, both ways. Both ways.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And I think, the only thing I've done and learning the hard way is to have a open and honest conversation with the finance team and be like, guys, how can we, this is what I need to do, I know what you guys need to do, how can we work together? And I agree with you, once you bring them on, they understand the operation, so on and so forth, and the challenges, it's much, much better. But throughout your time, whether it's with your current business or whether it's with your previous colleagues or businesses, what has been your biggest sort of challenge to turn around?
No, it's the biggest challenge to turn around was building the culture. So, and that takes a long time. So, it sounds quick that you do one workshop, but it's not done with that. So sometimes you build the culture until people get comfortable and it takes 12 months.
So explain, let's dig deep into that, Judith.
So if you wanted to get all the departments around the table to understand, let's say, food cost, profitability, menu engineering, menu design, and you do a workshop collectively, and tweaking these workshops to get the breakthrough now or the aha moment that then the organizations have, that has been not so much a big challenge, but a lot of effort, but because with every workshop then you learn. But when you get the people and you make them interactive and you understand everybody, and then you mix up the talent within the pool and you do that combined with quizzes, and at the end then you set a strategy plan. But the strategy plan is not set by myself. It's the team that sets the strategic plan with the action plan and then also with the timelines. And then we come in and we hold it together and then we help them to implement that. But the biggest challenge for me, like in my career, was understanding revenue optimization, but getting other people that aren't analytical to understand what that actually means.
Right.
And to help to take out the fear factor. Why then it's so important to have the whole overarching commercial strategy departments on board with you, aligned. You can have the push and pull, you can have the agreements, you can have the conflict. That's very good because, when people don't always just sit around the table and nod and agree with you, then a lot of times they don't understand, they don't want to challenge, or they don't challenge you. And that's been one of the biggest learnings throughout my career, is making sure that you have the right balance and that you take the people onto the journey, that you create that culture. And that's one of the biggest pieces that big organizations have missing today. They all talk about F&B, revenue management. They all talk about menu engineering, menu design, and it's happening to a certain extent. But how do you take what you have to the next level? That's really what makes or breaks your business.
That's an amazing piece of advice also, because you're right. If you get everybody into the same culture, you're absolutely right. It's very much the same when I've worked at the highest level kitchens. Everybody has just one mindset and you know exactly the goal. So I think that's amazing. Now, how do you see, since being in the region for some time, how do you see the future of food and beverage within the region?
Oh, here it's endless. I mean, just when you see and what's coming up, I think here the future a lot more is on the homegrown products that can be utilized. And you see more and more now when you do your food shopping, just like as a normal consumer without doing the food shopping necessarily for restaurants, how much more on the fruits and the vegetables are actually grown locally, which I think is amazing. The fact that, we now have access to our own oysters and we don't have to bring them, necessarily all the time from other destinations is amazing. The whole food aspect, homegrown and sustainability, that's also very important. And I mean, there are some great companies that do a lot with the food waste management, and they repurpose the food waste. And I mean, the other day I was at a conference, and it was at the Conrad on Shakeside Road, part of Hilton. And then they had along the breakfast buffet the little tubes, and there was just the composted food waste that you could then take with you. And then I took like 2 tubes home with me, and then I planted tomatoes at home with the kids.
Oh, how amazing is that?
So it's just for them to see. And that's something then also as a parent I've always been missing here in Dubai, to make sure that the kids actually realize where the food is coming from, which I think is really important, for the generations to come. Or then initiatives like the Bio Emirates Farm is doing, where you can take the family out for the farm days, where the children then learn how to grow and to learn more about the organic products. Organic products here in the region, I think, have a lot more opportunity for growth. It's something that's really strong across the European countries. Not enough available here because just so much still has to be imported.
Yeah. And since the arrival of Michelin, Gomelo, 50 Best, have the revenues improved? Have they gone down? Because what tends to happen is that you have your standard restaurant that everybody goes to, has not been in the guide, has a certain price, and then as soon as they're in some type of guide, then the prices skyrocket 30% plus. Is that the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do you think?
Again, it comes back to who is your audience, and if your restaurant is still full and you don't suffer in terms of your covers, then why not? And maybe before it was underpriced. But not everything in terms of, revenue optimization always has to be with the price increases. Dubai has very high price tags around, every single restaurant. And I think it just needs to go hand in hand. Does it have to be 30% straight away? No. When the alcohol tax was removed, did the alcohol drop by that equal amount? No. So I think certain things need to be passed on back to the end consumer. But then also if you're able then to hire better quality talent, if you're able to give back more to your employees, if you're able to increase your bonuses that you're paying, it all depends what is the objective of the price increases. Not just because now you're in the Michelin guide, but if that now warrants that you can reposition your product, then, I think, again, it comes back to the strategy and comes back to finding the right price for the right customer at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Judith, we have come to the quick fire questions of the show. So, first of all, are you sweet or salty?
Sweet.
Cheddar or Parmesan?
Parmesan.
Sunday roast or fish and chips?
Sunday roast.
Now, these don't need to be necessarily chefs, but who would you say are your top 3 culinary heroes?
That's very interesting. Well, one of them is my mother, who has an amazing talent for cooking and passed that also then on. And then I love Nobu. And again, he's also like an amazing chef. And it's just, having met him numerous times and, there is a certain level of relationship, but then also how the company was built and how it's been grown. And then also then domestically, I've got great admiration for a local grown brand. One is actually two. One is Mythos, which is also in JLT, and then also for Café Isan. And I think, it's just then also on how businesses were built from the ground up by believing in the right product, amazing customer experience, amazing culinary journey. And you feel like it just brings me Café Isan, brings me back to my time living in Bangkok and going to the side soys. I'm all about, I'm more the street food. I love going to the big brands and I love going to, the nice dinners. But really down, the chefs that really inspire me are the ones that have created the street food scene, atmosphere, and where you really get the true, authentic dishes.
And those are 2 amazing places because Café Isan has just opened in Time Out. And Mythos has just entered the 50 best discovery list in San Pellegrino. So, and they're both, phenomenal places, really. So then, when it comes to favorite cuisines, what are your top 3?
My top 3, okay. Can I group Asia all together?
Yes.
So
yes.
it's definitely Asian, Italian, and German.
Oh, okay. And how much German food do the kids know at home?
Still quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I do cook quite a lot of the traditional German dishes, and then also especially the ones that we eat when we're in Germany in the summer, that you cannot buy here.
Oh, amazing!
Yeah.
Amazing.
So and now I can't wait for asparagus season. So we'll have asparagus until it comes out of our ear.
So then, if it was to be your last meal on earth, what would it be?
That would definitely be my schnitzel and the spätzle.
Yeah. So then, Judith, if you could, what advice would you give to 16-year-old Judith?
16-year-old Judith. Don't sweat the small stuff. Find mentors. Go out of your comfort zone and ask for help. Don't pretend you need to know it all without the experience that you have. And then even if the tone can be rough sometimes, especially then also then when you were in the kitchen. I mean, I still remember, I was in banquets at the time, and then we had the fashion week. I was like 2 weeks into my internship, and then I was told, back then we still wrote everything down manually.
Yeah.
And then we had to give the receipt down to the kitchen, and we had to ask them how much it costs. because then that's what had to be charged in, again on the banquet floor to the vendors that were exhibiting for the fashion week. And then I remember going down, and I was just happy that I found the kitchen, from the banquet floor. It was a big hotel. So then I found the kitchen, and then I went first, to the wrong section of the kitchen, and it was spaghetti bolognese. So I went to the cold kitchen. Oh, you don't get that here. Okay, fine. Go to the next section. Again, wasn't the right one. Was the in the patisserie, but I had no clue that this was the patisserie. And then I go to the for the warm kitchen. And then I was just like relieved because I didn't have much time to go back up.
Sure.
And the food had to go back up, right? And then the sous chef then asked me, so how much does it cost? I said, how should I know? And then he said, you have to ask me that question. But it wasn't quite that friendly.
Yeah.
So it's then again, and that just then, scared me in the beginning quite a bit. But then like throughout my career, I learned that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to say, I don't know what I have to do. It's okay to say, I don't understand. And I think that's the advice that I would give to the younger audience and also to the younger self, that even though people expect that you know what you need to do, they don't know what you don't know, and they don't know that you need help. And that's really important, that you just simply ask for help.
I think that's amazing advice, Judith, really. So then if I wanted to learn more about maximizing revenue or learn anything and everything to do with revenue, and I don't know anything, what would be your advice on that? Because I know that you're involved with certain organizations.
Well, there are some really good articles available online, but I'm also the chair of the HSMI Revenue Optimization Advisory Board here based in Dubai in the Middle East. We do an annual conference, which is the commercial annual conference, but we also have a mentorship program. And that's also then for people that want to get advice, want to be coached on their numbers, on their their knowledge on revenue management, or to simply want to be mentored and coached in regards to how they should be approaching, how to build the bridges between the departments. And we've just launched that. So applications we're still accepting. If anybody who's listening to the podcast wants to apply, they can follow me on LinkedIn. They can follow Black Coral Consulting. I've also done numerous thought leadership pieces online. Some were featured with, hotel catering, Middle East. So, they can reach out directly, and I'm happy to have a chat for anybody, who wants to know a bit more. And there are a lot of, and then guide them to the right resources that might help them.
So what I'll do is I'll put all of those in the show notes for everybody to have.
Okay, great.
So, Judith, I just wanted to sort of have a recap of what we've been discussing, because it's just been amazing. From your childhood food memories to your education, the banqueting kitchens, the passion, obviously revenue management, 12 years at Kerzner, which is amazing. That's no mean feat. I think that's phenomenal. Of course, having your amazing Black Coral Consulting company, that you finally had your own dream to do that, I think is amazing. And really all of the advice to do with revenue optimization, connecting departments together, I think is such incredible and refreshing advice. Because if more people were together like that, so much more revenue and business and synergy would be, it would be fantastic. So on behalf of the Chef JKP podcast, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time to come. And really, I have learned a huge amount, and I'm sure the audience have too. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a great pleasure.